When it comes to the behavior of dangerous kids, there is a never-ending debate over the role that nature versus nurture plays. Some argue that it is in a child's genetics to be violent and destructive, while others maintain that it is the result of the environment in which they were raised. Regardless of the answer, the fact remains that there are dangerous children in our world. Kids who harm others or themselves, and who struggle with violent tendencies. These children present a challenge to society as a whole, as we must decide how to approach them in order to ensure their safety as well as that of the rest of society. Here are 10 kids who are currently rotting behind bars for their heinous crimes. Mary Bell, also known as the Tyneside Strangler, was a child murderer who shocked the world in 1968 with her horrific crimes. At only 11 years old, Bell killed 2 young boys, Martin Brown and Brian Howe, in Newcastle, England. Bell had a traumatic childhood, being neglected and physically abused by her mother and exposed to sexual acts at a young age. This early trauma is believed to have contributed to her violent behavior. On May 25, 1968, Bell strangled 4-year-old Martin Brown in a derelict house. Just 2 months later, on July 31st, she killed 3-year-old Brian Howe, leaving his body in a field. The community was horrified, and Bell's trial became a media sensation. Despite her young age, Bell was found guilty and sentenced to indefinite detention, which was later changed to life imprisonment. Throughout her incarceration, she was seen as a high-risk prisoner due to her manipulative behavior and the severity of her crimes. Bell was released in 1980 after serving 12 years in prison, under a new identity to protect her from public outrage. Since her release, she has managed to stay out of trouble, living quietly and raising a daughter. However, her horrific crimes have left an indelible mark on the community and the families of her victims. Her case remains a cautionary tale about the dangers of neglect and abuse in childhood, and the importance of recognizing the signs of mental illness early on. In the end, Mary Bell's crimes serve a tragic reminder of how vulnerable children are, and how early intervention and support can prevent tragedies like hers from happening again. Amarjit Sada, the youngest serial killer in history. Amarjit Sada, born in 1998, hailing from the state of Bihar, India, is infamously known for being the youngest serial killer in history. Sada was only 8 years old when he was arrested for the first time for the murder of his 6-year-old cousin. He later confessed to the killing of 2 other children, all within a span of 7 months. The magnitude and cold-bloodedness of Sada's crimes sent shockwaves throughout the world, with many still grappling to understand the why and how behind it all. Sada's life was a tumultuous one, fraught with extreme poverty and abject living conditions. He lived in a small village with his parents and 8 siblings, who often went days without proper meals. His father worked as a laborer, earning a paltry wage that barely covered their expenses. To make ends meet, Sada's parents would sometimes resort to selling him off to wealthy families as a bonded laborer. It was during one of these stunts that Sada, at the tender age of 7, experienced unspeakable abuse, trauma, and deprivation, which are often linked to causing severe mental disturbances. In 2006, Sada was sent to live with his uncle in the neighboring village, who himself was grappling with financial woes and alcoholism. It was here that Sada's first victim, his 6-year-old cousin, met his untimely end. Sada was seen carrying the dead child's body, but instead of seeking help, he dumped the body in a field. When interrogated by the police, Sada seemed devoid of any remorse and narrated his heinous crime with shocking details. Over the next 7 months, Sada killed 2 other children in similar fashion and with increasing cruelty. The magnitude of Sada's crimes sent the world into a frenzy, with many psychologists, sociologists, and experts weighing in on the reasons that might have led to the 8-year-old's actions. While some blamed it on his horrific living conditions, others claimed it was a result of the lack of emotional connect and the nurturing of positive values by his caregivers. The debate around the causes of such a brutal act continues to rage on, with no clear-cut answers. Sada was detained by the authorities and kept in a children's correctional facility. According to sources, he showed no remorse for his actions and did not participate in any rehabilitation programs. His fate after serving the prescribed sentence is unclear, and the thought of his eventual release from prison continues to evoke fear and unease. Amarjeet Sada's case serves as a warning that trauma and abuse can cause deep and long-lasting scars on a child's psyche. It is imperative that authorities and caregivers take the necessary steps to ensure a safe, loving, and nurturing environment for all children, irrespective of their social and economic status. I don't like Monday's killer. On January 29, 1979, Brenda Ann Spencer carried out a senseless crime that shocked the nation and still sends chills down the spines of many to this day. Spencer was only 16 years old when she decided to shoot an elementary school from her home across the street. She used a semi-automatic rifle gifted to her by her father, which he bought her to shoot animals in their neighborhood. When she began shooting at the school, she killed 2 adults and injured 8 children. When the police arrived, they were astonished to learn that Spencer showed no remorse or motive for her crime. Her only explanation for the senseless act was, "I don't like Mondays." This comment made Spencer the inspiration for Bob Geldof and his band, the Boomtown Rats, to write a song of the same name, which soon became an international hit. In many ways, Spencer's crime symbolized a unique example of senseless violence that can be motivated by a lack of reason or moral impulse. Spencer was ultimately convicted and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, where she remains today as one of the few female mass murderers in the United States. Despite her prison sentence, her story still lingers as an example of the dark consequences that can result when troubled individuals are given access to weapons. Today, we must remember the innocent lives that were taken on that fateful day and honor them by promoting policies that help prevent these types of senseless acts from ever happening again. It's up to us to ensure that tragedies like the one committed by Brenda Ann Spencer are not repeated, and that we continue to work towards building a safer and more peaceful world for all. John Venables. The story of John Venables and his crimes is one that continues to haunt many people even after all these years. Venables was just 10 years old when he and his accomplice, Robert Thompson, committed one of the most heinous crimes in British history. They abducted and murdered 2-year-old James Bolger, leaving his tiny body on train tracks in Liverpool. The crime shocked the world and ignited a furious public debate about child murderers. After their conviction, Venables and Thompson were sentenced to indefinite detention with a minimum term of 8 years. However, in 2001, they were both released on license after serving just 8 years in prison. Venables, who had been given a new identity to protect him from vigilante attacks, was expected to start a new life free from his horrific past. Unfortunately, this was not to be. In 2010, it emerged that Venables had been returned to prison for violating the terms of his license. He had been caught with child pornography on his computer and had also been found to have breached his parole conditions by traveling abroad without permission. This shocking revelation only added to the public's sense of betrayal and anger. Venables' latest release in 2021 has also caused uproar amongst the public. People feel that Venables should have been locked up indefinitely and that his crimes were unforgivable. Despite all this, the government still thinks it is in his best interest to remain anonymous for his safety. But should the safety of an individual be more important than the safety of the rest of the public? The answer to that is yet to be known. In conclusion, the John Venables case will always remain one of the most heartbreaking stories of all time. It is a story that will never be forgotten by the people of Britain, and we will continue to fight for justice for James Bulger, the innocent 2-year-old boy who had his life cruelly taken away from him by Venables and Thompson. The tragedy of this case shows that there is a great need for reform in our criminal justice system, especially in how it handles child offenders. Let us hope that the system can be changed to prevent similar cases from ever happening again. Paris Bennett. Paris Bennett is a name that will forever be associated with a horrific crime. In 2007, when he was just 13 years old, he murdered his 4-year-old sister in cold blood. What is known is that Paris was not an ordinary child. He had a high IQ, but also a troubled childhood that included being physically abused by his biological father and witnessing his mother's drug addiction. He had a history of violence, having once stabbed another child with a pencil, and had also been diagnosed with ADHD and ODD. Paris was eventually sentenced to 40 years in prison for the murder of his sister. In interviews since his conviction, he has expressed remorse for what he did and acknowledged the impact that it has had on his family. The tragedy of Paris Bennett's crime is that it could have been prevented. His troubled upbringing, mental health issues, and history of violence were all warning signs that should have been taken seriously. Instead, a young life was lost and another was forever altered by the actions of a child who never got the help he needed. Robert Thompson, also known as John Venables' partner in crime, a once promising young man with a bright future, became notorious in the city for a crime that shocked the community. The details of his heinous acts were so gruesome that it sent chills down the spines of all who heard of it. Robert found solace in a group of delinquent teenagers who introduced him to drugs and criminal activities at the young age of 10. It was in this dark circle of friends that Robert hatched his sinister plan. On a fateful night, he and his accomplice, John Venables, abducted 2-year-old James Bulger from a shopping center and brutally murdered him. The pair then disposed of the toddler's body on train tracks in an attempt to cover up their crime. The shocking incident rocked the community, and the city rallied together to seek justice for the innocent child. After a lengthy trial, Thompson and Venables were found guilty for their crime and sent to a young offenders institution for their horrific actions. Years have passed since that dreadful day, but the memory of James Bulger lives on in the hearts of the community. As for Robert Thompson, he remains behind bars, haunted by his heinous act and the life he could have had if he had not fallen down a path of darkness. Derek and Alex King. It was a gruesome and heinous crime that shocked the small community of Cantonment, Florida, U.S. On November 26, 2001, Terry Lee King, a loving father and well-known resident of the town, was bludgeoned to death by his own 2 children, 13-year-old Derek and 12-year-old Alex King. The news of the murder spread like wildfire, sending shockwaves throughout the town. People couldn't believe that the 2 innocent-looking children could commit such a heinous crime. Questions began to arise. What could have driven these 2 young boys to murder their own father? Was it premeditated or a crime of passion? As the investigation progressed, a dark and troubling picture began to emerge. Derek and Alex King were not your typical teenagers. They had a troubled childhood, having growing up with an abusive and neglectful father. According to their mother, they had been physically and emotionally abused by Terry King for years, and it seemed that they had finally had enough. The night of the murder, the boys had been arguing with their father over a disciplinary matter. Things escalated quickly, and before anyone knew it, Terry King lay dead on the floor, the victim of a brutal attack. Shockingly, the boys had even tried to set their father's body on fire in an attempt to cover up their crime. Despite their young age, Derek and Alex King were charged as adults and faced a possibility of life in prison. But in the end, justice was served, and the boys were sentenced to just 7 years in a juvenile detention center. The murder of Terry King was a tragedy that left a permanent scar on the community of Cantonment, but it also serves as a cautionary tale of the consequences of child abuse and the need for early intervention. May we never forget the lessons learned from this tragic event, and may Terry Lee King rest in peace. The truth is, no one really knows what drives kids to kill. Is it the things they have seen? The way they were brought up? Or maybe some people are just born evil?